And I quite often say to people, we've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So my session tonight is really going to be partly inviting you to share some of the things you've learnt this last week from the stuff that I've sent, and also me sharing some of my issues around racism and walking a day in my life. So I had a couple of people email me to say they wanted to read a poem. Sandy and Colette both said they wanted to read one. So before we start, are they ready to read one, or do they want me to move on? Not heard anybody. Sandy?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, Alyson, it's Colette.
Colette.
Well, I must say I wasn't expecting to read a poem, and I did put out the ones that I would like to hear.
Okay.
So if you still want me to read, I'm very willing. But I will need the poem put up, please.
Okay. Well, I'll read it towards the end, but I know what Warren wanted to read some as well. Warren, do you want to read yours? Is yours ready? You're on mute, Warren.
Sorry. I'm ready.
I was. So yeah, yeah. There were 2 or 3, but I also have expressed an interest that I've also known and admired Alyson for many years. I first came across her when I was teaching in a school. As the poem "Colorblind," I actually feel has a lot of resonance for me. Because I know the young person that you were talking about when you wrote it. So I'm very happy to read that, although there are several of the poems that I found very powerful. So this one's "Colorblind." When will you use me to make the picture bright? When will you use me? Will the time be ever right? Are you ashamed of me, or are you running scared? Do you really see me? And do you really care? I am part of you. You gave birth to me. Yet you ignore my very existence, always refusing the real me to see. That I am a mixture, a part of you and Dad, not ever seeing my blackness that really makes me sad. I know deep down you love me. I know inside you care, but not recognizing my mixedness makes our lives hard to share. Show me some respect, Mum. Demonstrate your love, 'cause when you and Dad created me, I was a blessing from above. When did that all change, Mum? Was it when the shadows fell? Was it when I grew darker? Was this what made your life hell? No need to be ashamed of me. No need to pretend that you are not my mother, just a child of your friend.
Thank you. Thank you. My poems started when I was about 8 or 9. I had a very stressful life growing up, and the only way I could cope was to write. So every time I got to a stressful place, I found positivity in writing. So that poem that you read just now was for a young man that I fostered, and I could see his pain, and in order to help myself with the pain that I was seeing through him, I wrote the poem, which helped me at that time. So I'm going to start tonight with the history, and I think it's really important to start with history. And if you look at the word history, it's his and story, and it can be her story as well. But I think the important thing for me is that since 1965, we've had Race Relations Acts in the UK. And when you read this here, it says it was the first Relation Act, but prior to it, it was illegal to discriminate. It was legal to discriminate against people because of the colour of the skin. So, you know, I was born a long, long time ago. And when I think about the time before this, which I was in England, that it was legal to discriminate against me because of the colour of my skin. And that was until 65. And in the 60s, people in Britain were subject to overt and cruel racism. And that includes myself, which I'm going to share with you a little bit longer. And you did see those signs: no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. And you'd see those in windows. And when I was growing up, my dad used to tell me a story about coming to England. He came in the Windrush to support the country after the war. And I was very young when he came here. I didn't know him at all. I was a baby. And he used to tell me stories, and the stories he told me, I'm so terrified of rats and mice because of the stories that he told me, that he said that he used to get rat-infested rooms to live in, where the rats would be able to move all the covers off your bed because there were so many in the room. And that's the only place that he could stay. But actually he came here to prop the country up. And I don't know if you saw the Mike Richards story the other day, but again, they said somebody came from Jamaica again to work after the war, knocked on the door where he was going to stay. The person that he was meant to see wasn't there, and she said to him, your case can stay, but you can't until he comes back. So his case could go into the house, but the gentleman who just got off a plane from Jamaica, he couldn't. So, you know, we're still dealing with racism in the UK. It's still there. We're still experiencing it, and it may be in different ways. And the slides I sent you, I showed you the old-fashioned racism and the modern racism. And sometimes it's so subtle that you can't necessarily call it. I was once in a shop buying a magazine. Well, I was buying a few magazines actually, and I was given my change on the table, not in my hand. And that is a sign for me where people are saying, I don't want to touch you because of the colour of your skin. And I've experienced that all of my life. And this particular occasion, I hung around the shop to see how he gave the change to other people. And they all got the change in their hands. And I went back to the till and I said, can I have my money back, please? I'm not going to spend my pounds here, I said, because of the racism I've just experienced. And he threw the money at me. And that is an everyday experience. And one of the things I want to say, it's from childhood to adulthood. So it's not just as you get into adulthood. And what we've got to try and do is to help our children now to become adults that can appreciate diversity and difference. So as Black people, we've contributed to positively to the British country. And the issue here is a lot of people, again, on social media will say, what have they done? You know, they kept coming here to get our jobs. There's all of those things. But we're increasing levels of discrimination, harassment. And if you look here at some of the statistics, that young Black males continue to have the highest rate of employment. Young people continue to be failed by the education system. There remains a massive health inequality between Black and white people, and higher numbers of Black people will be housed in poor substandard accommodation. And the criminal justice system is overrepresented by Black people who receive consistently higher sentences. And again, as I said to you before, it's experience on a daily basis, and sometimes people don't recognise it. And there has been some recent events, Brexit being one of them, that have impacted on racially diverse employees. Some 6.5 million employees feel they cannot be their real selves at work. Less than half, 43%, think their colleagues don't know the real them. And again, a lot of people will know me, but they don't know me because they don't get to know me. They only want to know where I'm from. And when I tell them where I'm from, they still want to know where I'm from. So it's really important to think about, do we know those people? Yeah, do we know those people at all? I normally say, where they say, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Manchester. And they say, no, but where are you really from? And I say, well, I now live in Bury. And they say, no, where are you really from? And I say, my mother's womb. Because at the end of the day, they're trying to put you in a pigeonhole, trying to put you in a box. So half of Britain say that they're as likely to have experienced racism in the workplace on the streets. And they're truly shocking statistics, because in 2021, we shouldn't have to leave parts of our identity behind. That our cultural, ethnic, and religious backgrounds, our gender, our identity, our sexuality, and our health. And one of the things I say all of the time is about intersectionality. You know, I say to people, I'm Caribbean Chinese. Often people will not accept that I'm Caribbean Chinese. You know, my grandmother was Chinese, my dad was half Chinese, I was brought up with my Chinese culture. And it's really important to recognize that. But I'm also a certain age. I'm also certain disabilities. I've got 3 disabilities, and it's intersectional. So sometimes people are discriminating against me 3 times on, and then as a woman 4 times. You know, it's really important to think about that intersectionality and how people experience racism. So I'm going to give you a walk in my shoes. When I was 7, I was at school in Stretford in Manchester. I went to Gores Hill Primary School in Stretford in Manchester. And because I wrote poetry, and I said I wrote poetry from a very young age, I'd written a poem, and the teacher suggested that I read it in the assembly at school. And I was quite nervous because I hadn't been in the UK very long, about 18 months, something like that. But they thought my poem was good and they wanted me to read it. And I got on a stage at school, and when I tell you, I can feel myself reliving it again. But I got on the stage at school with 300 and odd children in the room. And I read my poem, and when I'd finished, every single person in the room laughed at me, including the teachers. And that was because I had a Barbadian accent, and they thought it was really, really funny to mimic and laugh at me. And when we discriminate against people, we think it's a laugh, it's just a bit of a joke, it's a bit of banter, but actually, emotionally, mental health wise, all of those things, it affects you. And I'll tell you in a minute how that affected me. When I was 16, I found a voice. I used to live in an all-white community. I grew up in an all-white community from the age of 5. And I didn't know that I was different. I didn't know that any of the other kids around me treated me differently. I felt I was part of them. I behaved like them. And sometimes I behaved in a way that was not nice because of the things that they were saying, that I was saying, and was copying them. And when I was 16, the Fab 208 magazine, people will remember the Fab 208 who are as old as I am. There was a magazine called the Fab 208, and they asked me to write about the difficulties of being different. And I really didn't know how I was different. I didn't know. And I went to some other girls at school who had come from Jamaica, Barbados, a whole range. And I sat with them one lunchtime, and I said to them, what does it mean? How are you different? Because I didn't see how I was different. And the stories they told me about racism, where they lived in their communities, the things that happened at school, I started realizing that some of those things were happening to me, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what its name was. And I was able to write that magazine piece about the difficulties of being different. And in writing that, that changed me from who I was to now who I am. And at the age of 28, I was doing my Cert Ed, and we had to go and present our paper. And I was at Bolton University at the time, it was called. And I had to present my paper, and it was on part-time teachers. And the morning I woke up of that presentation, emotionally, physically, I lost my voice. I couldn't speak. It took me back to the age of 7 when I was laughed at and ridiculed and demeaned in front of all those people. And I just couldn't speak. My voice just wasn't there, and I didn't understand it. But emotionally, the stress of it all, I couldn't do it. I lost marks because I couldn't do it. And I went, and the lecturer read it for me, but I didn't get as many marks because I didn't present it. And after that, I decided that I was going to try and speak in public. And when I was at Preston College, there was a guy there who I saw as an ally, and he was called Ian, and he was always on platforms speaking, talking, and he said to me, I can help you with this. And he said, just imagine all the people there sitting on the toilets listening to you. And I thought, oh, I can't do that. You know, I'm a professional woman, but I just saw all these people in front of me. And he said, and pick 1 or 2 out that have got friendly faces or smiles on, and look at them. And I came off that stage and I felt like $1 million, because I could do it, but that knocking of my confidence at age 7 prevented me from doing that. And when I was at Preston College, I left Bolton College as a manager. And again, when I was at Bolton College, my my manager was leaving, and 5 of us who were on the team all applied for the job. And when I was growing up, my father always said to me, there are 3 things in life that never come back: the spoken word, the sped arrow, and the neglected opportunity. So anytime you get an opportunity, always go for it. But remember that you've got to work twice as hard as everybody else, because the colour of your skin prevents you from getting in. So I did a whole range of things, presentations, all singing and dancing. I went into the interview, I came out and I felt great. I thought, I've done well. And out of the 5 of us, I got the job. But every single person I met in the college, instead of congratulating me, they said, well, you got it because you're black, because we haven't got any black people in the college. So it's probably, you know, Annie could have had it, you know, Shirley could have had it really, but I think they gave it to you because you were black. And that just took the shine off this job that I'd got. And when I had my one-to-one with my manager, I said to him, you know, what can I do to for a bit more promotion? And he said, well, the best thing you can do, he said, to go and work with 16 to 19s. So I was working with adults. And I left and went to Preston College. I went from being a manager back to being a lecturer. And I went to Preston College as a lecturer. And within 10 months of being at Preston College, I was appointed as a manager. And that brought back some confidence in myself. But when I got the job, my manager took me round to every single department to introduce me. And I was proud that I'd got the job. And I thought, I'm going to get some kudos here for it. I didn't get it at Bolton, but I'm going to get it here at Preston. And she introduced me to every single department. This is my new black manager. That's all I was, a new black manager. So tokenism, despite hard work, despite all the degrees I've got, all of those things, just because of the colour of your skin, they're not recognised. And later in life, I had to fight for justice for my boys. I had 2 foster children, and my first foster child, it was very bright, and one of the statistics was that only 13% of looked after children get 5 A's to C's. So we worked with him really hard to get to where he wanted to be, because when he came, he had some very wacky ideas about what he was going to do, because he'd been groomed in Hume for a whole range of things. But he did really well. And social services said that they would pay for his bursary at Bury Grammar School. And I went to a meeting, and suddenly they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to pay for it. He can just go to ordinary school. And I just thought, I'm not taking it. Only 13% of looked after children get 5 A's to C's, and here's a boy that is really, really bright. He's come from really, really poor background. He's been in care since he was 18 months old. He's had a terrible time. And I thought, I'm not putting up with it. So I went to the government and I wrote to the government and I said, here are the statistics. Here is the thing about looked after children, but here's the thing about black children. Yeah. And I shared those statistics. And believe it or not, one person that contacted me and fought this on his behalf, Ed Balls. Ed Balls was my man. He is the person who got my young man where he needed to be. He's now at Hull University and he's studying geography. And he would not be doing the things that he's doing if Ed Balls hadn't intervened, if I hadn't spoken up. And I said, that's when I found my voice. My other young man, his mum died when he was 3. And he, again, was mixed nationality. And his dad was from Nigeria. But when his mum died, the dad could not get back into the country. He was studying here and he'd gone back to Nigeria, but he couldn't get back into the country because of all of the sorts of visas and all these different things. So he wasn't here for the funeral of his partner, and his young son was taken into care at the age of 3. And he came to me at the age of 6. And all he wanted, he had ADHD, dyspraxia and autism. And all he wanted was a family. He wanted a mum and he wanted a dad. And when he was about 11, his dad had been fighting for him for a very long time to get him. And social services wrote such a racist report about this child. You wouldn't believe it. you know, how poor Nigeria was, how much like a jungle it was, all the awful, awful things that they wrote. And again, I had to stand up and fight. And I had somebody, the reporting officer, came to see me, and she said to me, she said, you were right to call it out. You were right to say it was racist. She said, and if at any point they should take this report to the courts, I will stand up in court and say, this can't happen. And she changed everything. The school, again, was the same school where my first young man went. They stood by our side. They were allies. They didn't just write reports. They spoke on his behalf in every single meeting. And he's been living in Nigeria for the last 3 years. And he has no ADHD. He doesn't have dyspraxia. He doesn't have autism. It was all developmental from the death of his mother. And he's not on any medication anymore because he's got a father and he's got a stepmother. He's got a family. But we have to fight for those rights. And when George Floyd died, there was no one there to empathise with. There was plenty of people analysing why and, you know, what a bad man he was and what have you. But nobody came to you and said, how are you? Because at the end of the day, I was very, very distraught. I was very depressed. And it took a lot out of me because, you know, it's a little bit like a Coke bottle. I say, if you shake a Coke bottle up and take the top off, it goes everywhere. And this is what I was experiencing. I had a couple of allies who I'd worked with over a number of years, Ellen and Cheryl, and both of those were on the phone to me, talking to me and helping me through what I was feeling. And you didn't know you were going to feel it. You didn't know it was going to come. And that's probably, don't have to tell a lot of you how it felt, but it was really, really distressing. So it's really important to think about, what do we do to support and to help? So you've read the presentations that I've sent you in preparation for this session, and I'm open to questions, comments, poems, and ready for you to reflect. Where does racism come from? Why is it still here? And what are you doing to eradicate it? Thank you. I'm going to hand over to you. Questions, all of those things that you might want to ask me. I'm going to stop my share so that you can ask me some questions. You have to watch the hands, Warren, see if any hands are going up. Jane's got a hand up.
I'd like us to reflect on why we think that a certain kind of white person owns the space that is England. A certain kind of white male, really, but maybe it's not so gendered at that level. But English still means a certain kind of person who even looks a certain kind of way, and certainly speaks a certain kind of way. Mm. And so I've seen some of my refugee friends try to learn a very particular kind of English so that by their accent, people might forgive their skin color. And that pains me because it's not good enough. Why should they have to make themselves acceptable by a certain kind of English accent?
Yeah, and I think in reflecting on that, you know, there's been times when you will tell people how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and they'll say, it's a race card. And I heard this when I was in teaching, that somebody would make a complaint and they say, well, she's playing the race card. You can't be impartial to an investigation, to look into it if that's what you're saying. And again, it is about those spaces. And, you know, the white privilege that you're also talking about is, I go on holidays 6 times a year. My sister lives in Tenerife, and my sister really brought me up. So she's like my mother, and I go to Tenerife to see her on a regular basis. And I never, ever, ever get through the airport. My husband does, because he's white, but I never get through that airport. And he's always sort of saying, why? And I say, it's just because of the colour of my skin. And when I went in February last year, I got through the airport and we did a high five as we got to the other side, because I've been going there since 1984. My sister's lived in Tenerife since 1984, and we did a high five. And he said to me, how have you got through? And I said, look at the person who's let me through. And that person looked like me. Yeah, so it's really, really important to think about that privilege, that power that we have. And again, your question about why is this? And it's 400 years of colonialism. It's all of the things that happened. I saw something on, it was either on Twitter or LinkedIn today, where it said, no, we haven't had any privilege, because somebody was making a comment that white people hadn't had any privilege, and they showed a room where it said, no coloureds, whites only, you know. And that's really, really important to think about. What do we do? You know, where does racism come from? And sometimes it comes from ignorance, sometimes it comes from values. And one of the things we say when we do our training is, your values are set by the time you're 20 years old, and they don't change unless you have this thing called a significant experience or event. And that might be that you go and work in another country. A girl once said to me on one of our courses, I've had that significant experience and event. And I said, well, tell us what it is. And she said, well, I was brought up in a little village in Bradford, just with all white people. And my parents always warned me not to talk to any black people, not to talk to any people who were Pakistani or Indian or anything like that. She said, and I grew up in this white village and never saw anybody, never talked to anybody. And she said, and then I went to Bradford University. And when I got to Bradford University, that was my sea. Because I met these people that my parents had said, don't talk to me about. And actually what happened was, I fell in love with the human beings that they were. And I married one of them. Now my parents are having to rethink how they think. Yeah, it's really important. Thank you. Sandy, you've got your hand up? Is it Sandy?
Yeah, I just
Didn't hear you.
really resonated with so much you said. And yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree that racism is here because of ignorance, because of fear. And as long as we have those things, racism will just perpetuate itself. And it's interesting is that in a country where the majority of people is black, and where a white person is a victim of racism, it feels exactly the same. You know, because I was in Africa, you know, with a friend, and I just saw racism operate in a very different way. Yeah, but my question is, I've not found other black people very supportive. You know, in issues of racism. I don't know if you have. And if you have, why is that? You know, why is it that sometimes black people will see something happening but will be silent?
Yeah.
And will, you know, kind of like back away.
And I can go back to, as I said to you, of my upbringing. And my upbringing is that I became a chameleon. And I think a lot of people become a chameleon to survive. When I've talked to people on my courses, they've said, you know, I will behave in a particular way in order to get through. I don't want to put my head above the parapet, because people have already got stereotypical words for me, aggressive, a whole range of things that I don't want leveling at me. And to get through the day, every day, I will just toe the line, and therefore they don't. And I think that you've got to find that voice. And I think, as I said, when I was 28, I found that voice. My brother used to say to me, you're going to have to tell your children this, and you're going to have to do this, and and I used to say, I'm not going to have to do anything. And I was in denial. Yeah. And I think I've been in denial for a very long time. And a long time ago, I came out. But when the George Floyd murder happened, I knew I've got an 18-month-old granddaughter. And I just thought, I don't want this for her. And I think that people have got to go on that journey. And that journey, it's a journey, not a destination. And it's really, really important that, you know, we journey to where we're getting to. And we don't do that analysis of people. we empathise with them, and we help them to get where they want to be. Thank you. Somebody else got their hand up? Warren, did you say?
No, I think that was all for now. But
Oh no, somebody's waving.
Awet has a hand up now, yes. Okay, very last question before the breakout groups.
Yeah. Alyson, thank you so much for that. It resonated on so many levels. As an immigrant, as a woman, as a person of colour, a lot of what you spoke about really spoke to me. I think it's so easy to call out overt racism, but what I struggle with is covert and subtle racism, not just directed at me, but directed to my friends. I would like to hear from you, Alyson. I mean, it's, you know, it's just the smallest things. I remember there are so many experiences of like racism that I can think about, and I won't bore you with all of them. But like when I first went to university, when I first got into Cambridge University, I think people were so shocked, particularly the college that I was at, people were so shocked to see someone of color. And like the first person that greeted me on my first day greeted me with a yo, yo, yo. Because I think they must have assumed that's how I spoke. And on that very same day, later on in the common room, someone asked me why Black people move their hands a lot when they speak. I said, you know, you move your hands a lot. Why do you do that? So when you come across comments like this, where it's not aggressive, overt racism, what is the best way to deal with that? How do you call that out? How do you address it?
Okay, I know Warren wants to go to the breakout rooms, but one of the things I've discovered recently is a book called The Subtle Acts of Exclusion. And the subtle acts of exclusion are all those microaggressions that you're just discussing. And because you call them microaggressions, people sort of shy away from them and they defend themselves because of the word aggression in there. But the subtle acts of exclusion really explains how you do it, what you say, and how you get people to listen to you when you're saying it. And you know, if you've got time, email me and I'll give you some of the pointers, but they're all in that book, and it is a really, really useful book. But I quite say to people, when you said that, what did you mean? When you said that, it felt really hurtful to me, and you're saying it to that person there. How do you think they feel? I'm going to go and have a check with her and see if she's okay, because it made me feel this way. And I think quite often people don't recognize that they're doing it. I was doing some teaching to some hairdressers recently, and we were talking about where are you from, you know, and where are you really from and all of that. And there was a guy, and he put his head in his hands, and he said, oh gosh, he said, when this guy first came here, I remember saying that to him. I hadn't even thought about it. The fact that we're sitting there talking about it, he now knows that it's not acceptable. It's just part of normal behavior for some people. But you've got to educate yourself. I think that the thing about educating yourself, you've got to read, you've got to talk to people, you've got to be in the circles where those people are, because sometimes when we do, again, training, we will ask people to write down the top 6 people that are their friends, that they go out with, that they talk to on a regular basis, have dinner with, and we use the protected characteristics from the Equality Act. And you can guarantee that none of the people on that list are racially diverse. They're not transgender, there's the whole race, and what they recognize is that they've got a small circle. So I'd say to some of you as well, just look on your social media and see who your friends are. See if they're diverse and different, because quite often they're not. And I know since the George Floyd thing, I think I've got 2,000 more new friends, because everybody's trying to put themselves in that circle to say, we stand up against racism. So it's really, really important to think about checking people and saying, what did you mean when you said that? When you said that, this is how it made me feel. But there's a whole 100 other ways to do it. Okay, sorry, Warren.